Welcome to the Excluto podcast. I'm Vijay Rajendran, a Silicon Valley-based investor and executive coach to startup founders, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's conversation. Today, we're going to be in a deep conversation about DeepTech with one of the notable investors that I have the pleasure of knowing in the space, Chirag Gupta. Our conversation today will cover his story as well as some of the interesting trends that are happening in the space. As noted in the past, nothing we're going to discuss today is investment or financial advice or legal advice, and it's really here for educational purposes. So with that, I'm delighted to welcome Chirag to the podcast.
Hi, Vijay. Thank you for having me for the podcast. It's super exciting. Last time we spoke, I've known you for almost 2 years now, or probably more. So
Yes.
You yourself has an amazing journey. So it's a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
The feeling is mutual. So let's dive in to the conversation today. Chirag, tell our audience a little bit about you and your journey, and before we get into 8X Ventures.
Absolutely. So I'll probably go in the chronological order. That's probably the easiest way. So I like to define myself as I was associated with the technology space from a very, very young age. So when I was 6 years old, my father bought me a computer, which was a very expensive computer back then. This was 1992. And I still remember the total space for the hard drive was 10 MB, which is less than the picture size on my phone that we typically take right now. So that was the total size of the hard drive, and it was a huge, massive computer, and was the state of the art technology available at that time. And interestingly, in 1992, my father somehow decided that I should learn computers. And I started learning coding at the age of 7, which was 1993. And by 1995, I was actually doing some advanced coding. In fact, I coded a car race game in 1996, for which I was awarded as one of the youngest coders in India. So my journey with the technology actually started long back, and thanks to my father, I got very excited about the computers. So I did that.
So we've known each other for a long time, and I knew you were very smart, but I didn't know you were also a child prodigy.
No, I think it looks pretty smart when I say in the hindsight, but my journey was very rocky when I was going through that. So I had a great education. I almost always had scholarships, fortunately. I did my MBA in NTU Singapore and University of Chicago Booth School of Business, which again was a scholarship as well. So I was lucky enough to do that. Then I chose to do consulting for a long time. So I worked across McKinsey, PwC, Strategy, and Korn Ferry. I worked across 11 countries. Half of my work centered around setting up the startup ecosystems. What should be the policies? What should be the framework and grants that the government can establish to build up the entire startup ecosystem? And if you go back in time, this is like 2009, 2010, 2012, this was the time San Francisco was doing a fantastic job, which is where you are. But the Asia as a whole was way behind the curve on the entire startup ecosystem. And if I talk about India, Indian statistics was technically, based on the current definition of startup, there were less than 1,000 startups across the country of 1.5 billion people at that point of time, which was like massively way behind everyone else. So I spent a lot of time working with different governments. I worked across India, Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, UAE, Saudi, some of the very, very exciting experiences I've had. Then one of the very lucky experience I had was in 2018, where I built an algorithm for Saudi, and I'll not go into the nuances of that. And I wrote to Harvard Business School at that point after I built the algorithm, and they recognized that it's actually a pretty breakthrough in the way how you solve civil defense challenges using data. and they wrote a case study on that. And I was awarded a scholarship from Harvard Business Analytics program to study business analytics at Harvard Business School, for which is a 1.5 year executive program. So that was probably like the second big milestone in my life. Then, lucky enough, I joined a company called Kareem, which used to be known as a ride-hailing company back then. In the Middle East, a couple of years back, the entire startup ecosystem was still very, very young. And Kareem was the first company that managed to break through and became the first unicorn across Middle East. And not just the unicorn, we actually managed to compete against Uber because we were doing similar services as Uber as well in the Middle East. And we managed to compete against Uber, which had a lot more capital available, versus Careem, which was a fraction of the size at that point of time. And because of the competition, Uber decided to acquire Careem for $3.1 billion, which was personally for me was a very, very exciting time, because I never, at that point, to be honest, I didn't know how many zeros are there in $3.1 billion. So I had to literally sit down and figure out what exactly is are these numbers we're talking about. And I remember seeing those Excel sheets and those calculations. They were it was just an eye opener on how much money is there in the technology space. And that's when I got excited. So money was one motivation, and the second was how you can actually change the lives of people by using technology. And that's when I decided I'm going to start making investments in the technology space. I briefly worked for a company called 500 Global, which is a global venture capital firm, where I had the pleasure of working with you as well. I worked there for about 6 months, and that's when I decided that my calling is in the deep tech space in India. That's when I partnered with three other partners, and we started 8x Ventures. This was end of 2021. It's been 2.5 years, very, very exciting journey. 15 portfolio companies so far. We are performing. Our performance is way ahead of the Indian ecosystem so far. We are performing at 2.1x MOIC, which is phenomenal performance. Which I believe. Originally, I thought it may be a fluke, but I think we have managed to figure out what is the right point of entry and right point of exit for us potentially. And so far, the fund is performing very well. So 8x Ventures, coming to 8x Ventures, focuses on deep tech startups. Now, deep tech is a fancy word for anything which is a disruptive innovation, and something which requires a massive technological work. Within deep tech, there are so many things that you can do, and AI actually gets the majority of the limelight. But for us, we are a lot more focused and a lot more excited about the hardware side of the business, and relatively less excited about the AI side of the business. So that's what we do at 8x Ventures. I can elaborate more as we go along in what do we do in 8x Venture, but that's a summary.
Thanks for that high level view. Before we go into deep tech, I'd like to ask: is all hardware considered deep tech, and is all deep tech hardware? Like, how do you think about those two different terms?
No, they are very two different things. So deep tech may or may not be hardware, and hardware may or may not be deep tech. They are for anything to be qualified as a deep tech, there has to be proprietary innovation, A, and B, there has to be defensibility on the innovation, not just from a IP perspective, but also from the perspective of if you and I sit down and try to replicate some of the innovation that someone else is doing, there has to be a long gestation period before we can catch up with someone else. And I can share some examples as well, if that is exciting.
Yeah, so there's a technical moat that you see coming into existence. Yeah, share an example of what that looks like.
So I'll probably take an example of robotics. So now robotics has been in the industry or globally. Boston Dynamics has been doing a great work in the robotics space. But globally, there are many different companies which are working on robotics. Now, why certain areas of robotics will qualify as deep tech and why certain areas will not qualify as deep tech. There are certain use cases where building a robot requires significant technological understanding, and for anyone to replicate that requires years and years of research and years of reverse engineering of someone else's product. So that kind of robotics will qualify as deep tech. For example, we're talking about now robotic dogs that will actually sense your emotions, and there are all sorts of things that we're talking about right now. There are robotic toys that are available, which will sense the mental well-being of the child, and they will respond accordingly. So there are a lot of robotic solutions available. Not every robotic solution is a deep tech. There are a lot of robots that can be easily replicated, and it's an open source technology now. So that is not something exciting for us. What is exciting for us is the technology has to be the moat, and there has to be a very clear use case or very clear problem statement that you're solving with the robot that you're building.
Interesting. And is most deep tech tending to be something with a B2B application?
Mostly, yes. So there are some B2C applications as well. Um, Technically, if you think of that, Uber about in 2013, 2014 was a deep tech. So it was a B2C solution, because, and I will call it a deep tech because in 2015, building a tech marketplace was a complicated algorithms. And one of the complicated side of the business is of course, the matching of demand and supply, which is the riders and the cabs, but it is also the latency of the app, which was a complicated technology in 2014-15, which Uber did a fantastic job. So now, what is latency? When you press a button, like let's say you pick up or you put your location, that this is the location I want, and then you press the button on I want a cab. Now, if you go back in time, in 2014, it used to take about 11 seconds for the system to do the processing and figure out where are the cabs and identify which one is the nearest cab, and then interact with that cab driver and initiate that negotiation with the cab driver. Now that latency has dropped to 1.5 seconds. Now, what is the implication of that? If you are standing there for 11 seconds, just waiting for any app to respond, you will realize you will lose your interest in 10 seconds or probably less. You
Yeah.
start thinking, oh, you know what? Maybe I can just walk down and flag a cab and I might be able to get a cab. So what Uber did phenomenal job, is they actually brought the latency of the marketplace down to 1.52 seconds, which did not exist back then. So it was a deep tech solution. So, and like most deep tech solutions, they start as a deep tech, but they eventually converge into a normal tech. So
Yeah.
what I'm talking about in the robotic space, a lot of robotic solutions will start as a deep tech right now. But if we do this conversation in 2034, we'll probably call them a soft tech, and this is something that probably will be taught in a grade 11 of computer science to 17-year-old children on how to build those robots. So typically in a decade, the deep tech doesn't stay a decade for too long.
That's very exciting. So my 6-year-old in 2034 will be playing around with some of today's deep tech. That could be kind of cool.
Absolutely. And if you think of it right now, building a marketplace has become so easy. If you Google it, you will find some open source algorithms which are already available. You can
Yeah.
actually build something similar to Uber by using those algorithms. Of course, you may not reach those level of efficiencies, but it is not a deep tech anymore. It's an open source technology.
Right. No, that's exciting and worthwhile for us to understanding today's technical challenges tomorrow just become market or business challenges, and the frontiers of what is deep tech keep changing. What are some of you mentioned robotics. What are some of the other really conspicuous categories of deep tech?
So for us, there are four categories which are exciting. Of course, the deep tech ecosystem is much broader than that, but I'll talk about what is exciting to us first, and then I'll talk about the rest. There are four areas that are pretty exciting for us. First is the robotics. Second is Industry 4.0, which has a lot of innovation happening on how you can optimize manufacturing, increase the quality of manufacturing or localize the manufacturing. So that's the second area. Third area is the biotech space. There's something that we have learned from COVID is that there's so much unknown and there's so much potential in doing investments in the biotech space. And within biotech, if I go one level deeper, in the genomics space is something which is a super exciting space for us. And there's a lot of research and innovation that has been happening. And there are a lot of problems that have been solved already, but there are a lot of problems which have not been solved. Just to give you an example, the entire genomics of animals has not been solved fully yet, right now, so far, and there's a lot of white spaces over there. So that's the third space for us. The fourth space is the computing space. Now, on computing, of course, AI is a big thing. But as I said, I'm not something which is I'm personally not very bullish on AI. But I am very bullish on the peripherals of AI. Now, what are the peripherals of AI? Semiconductor is a peripheral of AI. Data integrity is a peripheral of AI. Cybersecurity is a peripheral of AI. So all these spaces which are peripheral of AI, as the AI grows, the demand for the remaining sector increases. We personally are very bullish on those sectors. So now these are the areas where we are bullish on. But having said that, in every industry, there are some sort of deep tech solutions that are brewing. They may not be many, but there are some solutions that are brewing. MedTech is one space that we are not very bullish on, but there are a lot of deep tech solutions that are coming up right now as we speak. Pharma is something which has been always in the deep tech space, and pharma has always been doing researches. These large companies like J&J have always been doing researches on those topics. So that is also an area of deep tech. However, we are not very bullish on because there are already existing large players which have captured the market over there. So just like that, in every industry, there are some deep tech solutions that are available. But we have identified what do we understand and what do we want to focus on.
That's really helpful. You know there's this spectrum of different opportunities, but you're really dialing into a particular subset of those. When you think about the complexities of deep tech, how do you say, based on technology readiness, that this makes sense and the time for this is right, but something else it doesn't make sense?
I wish this was a straightforward question. This is a really, really complicated question, and I think us as a venture capital firm get paid on a day-to-day basis just to answer that question, because this is so complicated question that we end up spending so much time on this. So I will try to answer that question at a generic level, but of course the answers varies from a case to case on which technology we are reviewing. So every technology that we review, we look at it from two dimensions. One is the technological readiness, and one is the market demand. So now, what is a technological readiness? Now, there are a lot of benchmarks available, and there's something called TRL, which is technological readiness level, which has been articulated by NASA originally, but has been customized by different universities to use for their internal conversations to understand how mature is the technology that someone is trying to build. So, for example, in IIT Chennai, every technology that gets built by a PhD student, if you go and ask the professor, they will tell you where exactly it is. Is it at TRL 3 level? Is it at 4 level? Or is it at 5 level? Generally, getting technological TRL 1 to 3 is relatively straightforward because it's a paper exercise. 4 to 6 is a lot more complicated because you're trying to bring paper to life, those technological drawings to life. It's a lot more complicated. And 7 to 9 is where the rubber hits the road, i.e., you take your technological solution and go and deploy it in, let's say, a corporate setting, and see, is it actually delivering the results what it is meant to deliver. Now, universities do a fantastic job when it comes to TRL 1 to 4. Corporates get very excited at TRL 7 to 9. TRL5 and 6 is the most risky valley of death that exists in the technology space. And that's where a lot of judgment call comes in about the founders, about promoters, about the technological maturity, that can they actually drag from TRL 5, 6 to 7, 8, which is when the corporates will hold their hand and take them to the maturity. So that is the one dimension, which is the technological readiness, where we spend a lot of time with every startup that we look at. The second dimension for us is the market demand or market need. Now, one of the interesting things about robotics or technology or most technology, a lot of people love to play with the technology. A lot of people love to talk about technology on or during dinner and drinks, but very few are willing to pay for it, and they very few really understand how can you use that on a sustained basis to improve your efficiency or to generate like 100x output or versus what you're generating right now. Now, this is where spending a lot of time with the potential customers to understand how deep is the need and how deep is their realization of the need is very important. A lot of time the need does exist, but their realization of the need does not exist. And this is a very nuanced amount of work that you have to go to. You need a jacket because it's cold right now, but you may not, it may take you another 2 hours before you realize that you need a jacket. So so that realization, and then again there is a judgment call that comes in play. When do we think they will realize that there is a need for them? And is it a push need? Is it a pull need? Are they going to pull it, or is it going to be pushed by someone? So all those nuances come into play. So every technology has to be spent a lot of time on the market need side of it to be able to understand where exactly this is going to fall.
Meanwhile, while you are trying to see whether there's a push or pull from future customers, these deep tech startups or projects even require deep pockets. They consume a lot of capital, right? So how does that factor into how you see this world?
Okay, so I am going to disagree with you on this.
Mm-hmm.
Deep tech startups do require capital, but it is not significantly more than soft tech startups. And let me elaborate on that. Of course, this is a blanket statement. It varies on technology to technology. There are a lot of deep tech technologies that do not require massive or billions of amount of money. If you are, of course, trying to compete with Chat GPT, you can't compete with, which is a deep tech solution right now, which is probably the most talked about deep tech solution right now. You definitely can't compete that with a couple of $1 million. You probably need a couple of $1 billion just to even think about competing with them at this point of time. So yes, there are certain, again, if you are talking about pharma, which is also a deep tech industry, it requires a massive amount of money before you can talk about starting to generate money. But there are a lot of solutions where there's already a market demand and there's a realization of market demand, there's a pull from the market. Those do not require massive amount of money. And let me give you an example from robotics, since we were talking about robotics. We have a portfolio company called Solenas. Now, what does this company do? There's a massive problem statement in India about septic tank where there's a human waste which is stored. The cleaning of septic tank is done manually in India. Now, this was like, and 70% of human waste in India is stored in septic tank, which is a massive amount of number given the population size that we have in India. Now, in 2013, there was a law that came out. Cleaning of septic tanks is illegal. In 2015, there was another law that if you try to send anyone or ask any of your employees to clean that septic tank, you will be penalized and jailed for 6 months. That's a law. But now, what's the reality on the ground? The reality of the ground is Because there is no solution available, the humans are still cleaning septic tank despite the law, despite the penalties, and despite people dying. By the way, every day on an average, 13 people die in India because they were cleaning septic tanks, which releases methane, which is massively dangerous to the human body. A lot of people die inside that septic tank. Now, this company built a robotic solution to replicate the human action inside the septic tank. And someone who's standing outside the septic tank can operate that robot and do exactly the same thing that he would have done inside without going inside the septic tank, which is a massive breakthrough. It took them about 1.5 years to build their first prototype, and the entire cost of building that was approximately $200,000. Then they iterated on that. It took them about $400,000 to iterate and build probably version 3 or version 4 now, which can replicate the entire human actions, and it's already in use. So they are out of 29 state governments. 5 state governments have already accepted the solution by this company, and this company has scaled massively from a revenue generating of $2,000 a month as of beginning of last year to almost $200,000 per month as of right now. And right now, a lot more contracts are coming in. So they have not even touched the surface of the demand right now. A lot more contracts are yet to come in. So now, coming back to your original question, is there a massive amount of capital required? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. In this case, probably what they have spent in so far, collectively, cumulatively, everything included, is less than $1 million. So they are, and it is a deep tech solution. They have significant amount of patents. They have people trying to replicate that for the last 2 years, and no one has been able to catch it up. So, so yeah, people have managed to build deep tech solutions for less than $1 million as well.
That's an intriguing idea, and I think an understandable problem. But a startling statistic. Thinking in terms of why anyone should invest in deep tech versus other parts of venture capital. What do you think is attractive today about this area?
So I'm going to give you the US statistics first, and then I'll come to here. In US, and similar for Europe and China as well, 25% of the funding right now goes into the deep tech ecosystem. And this includes the government funding as well. The US government budget has budgeted 3% of their GDP on R&D. European governments on an average have budgeted 2.5% of the GDP on R&D, and similar numbers for China. In India, so far, the number used to hover around 0.4% to 0.6%. This is the first time in this year the number is likely, not yet confirmed, but likely to exceed 1%. And given the GDP by itself for India is much smaller than the GDP for the US, 1% GDP of India versus 3% GDP of the US, you can't compete with the US technology, and that's what explains why US has been ahead of the curve on the technological development, and that explains why San Francisco, Miami, New York, Boston have done consistently fantastic jobs. Now, why you should invest? If you look at again the US statistics, out of 25% money that went into the deep tech startups, 35% of the unicorns in the last 5 years were deep tech companies. And if you look at the proportions, the likelihood of deep tech company becoming unicorns is always a lot more historically. And again, US number, 38% of the companies, by the time they hit a unicorn status, they were deep tech. They did become a soft tech as they matured, like Uber, like Airbnb, and all major companies that you talk about. They had a massive technological moat until they hit a certain level, and now the technology becomes like a soft tech. But 38%, and the number stands at 38%. In India, so far, the number stands at 8%. And the amount of money that was pumping into the deep tech ecosystem versus the overall startup ecosystem was around 4%. So now, coming back to your question on why you should invest, because the likelihood of you getting a unicorn by putting money into the deep tech startup ecosystem is way higher than putting money in any other ecosystem, in any soft tech solution right now. That is one. That is comparing against the startups. Now, comparing against other asset classes, let's talk about real estate, let's talk about fund of funds, let's talk about the equity market. All major asset classes in the US typically return 10 to 20% annualized return if you look at it on a 10-year basis. The selective deep tech funds in the US, and they were not many, now they are exploding. The selective deep tech funds, or the funds where the majority investments were in the deep tech space, have returned 30% IRR over the last 10 years. This is a US statistics now. Now, again, these statistics are not yet reflected in India, but we are pretty confident that these statistics will be reflected in India for the years to come. The entire deep tech space in India is new. The entire budget allocations in India is new. So these statistics are yet to be established. So in 5 years from now, when we'll have this conversation again, I'm pretty confident I'll be giving you numbers that in India, the total funding allocation was about 10 to 12% in the deep tech space, and about 25% of the unicorns in the future came out from the deep tech.
Yeah, as you point out, India is transforming. You see the growth of high-end manufacturing, of the space program, of various things that signify broader economic changes that tell you a lot about the role that technology can play there.
Absolutely, it's changing really fast. I personally feel that in the technology space, US has always been the market leader, and I don't think India has taken the throne off from the US. But India is starting to catch up, and India is starting to identify its own niche and specific use cases where India can succeed and win against the rest of the world.
Wonderful. On that note, what are some ways that people who want to learn more about DeepTech and 8X Ventures can follow you and see what you're up to next?
If you want to learn about 8X Ventures or DeepTech, first of all, I am always excited about these conversations. And B, if you are interested about DeepTech, whatever business you are involved in, whatever job you are involved in, ask yourself what technological solution can improve this work 100 times better than the way it is performed right now. Not 5 times, not 10x, not 50x, 100x. Think about 100x, and once you have thought about that, give me a call. I'll go out in the market together with you, and I'm sure there'll be some smart kid sitting in somewhere in India or in the US that is working on the technology and did not know who to sell it to. And I'm sure we'll find that guy and we'll make a business there.
That's super exciting. Thank you so much, Chirag, for this conversation, which has been a real treat and very enlightening. And I'm sure we'll get a lot of people intrigued and excited to learn more about DeepTech and the important work that you're doing.
So thank you, Vijay. Thank you for your time. It's lovely always talking to you.
Cheers.